'cause you were home.
Knives by Leica 29. The house I was renting was a murder house. Nothing to do with the story, but yes, I rented a murder house for a while. The people in the story are myself, Leica, and my best friend, Joe. I've been living in the murder house around 4 months with no issues, apart from me and Joe constantly pranking each other. Me and Joe were still working as station supervisors on the London Underground. Anyway, we were great friends. We both 100% mutually friend-zoned each other from the start, and we both shared a love of pranks. Sure, they got a little out of hand sometimes, but it kept both of us on our toes. At 26, Joe was almost 7 years older than me, and the only issue I had was that he would take my stuff sometimes. For instance, if I bought a pizza and put it in the fridge for when I got home from work, I'd come home, open the fridge, and see a note saying, "Leica, I took the pizza. Here's 20 pounds. Buy another one." And there would be a 20-pound paperclip to the note he'd written in the fridge. He did it with everything. Mostly when he'd had a few beers. He once drank a quarter bottle of brandy I'd been saving, and I was so mad I punched him, right in the arm as hard as I could. Joe had just laughed, and he had the kind of laugh that made me laugh too, but both of us never really took anything seriously for more than a minute. Anyway, the next time I bought brandy, I put the bottle in the drawer under my bed so he couldn't get it. I'd gone to bed and was sleeping when suddenly I was woken up by my bed moving. Joe was in my room, a little drunk, and he was carefully, well, as carefully as a big clumsy drunk could be, opening the drawer to get at my brandy. He saw me open my eyes and started laughing. "Shh, just sleep," he mumbled. "I'm just here for the brandy." Somehow I managed to restrain myself from breaking the bottle over his big drunk head. I handed him the bottle with a tired, narky, "Just fucking take it and fuck off." And he took it from me and stumbled out of my room. The next night I shut and locked my bedroom door while I slept. I told him to never come in my room and wake me again like that. A couple of nights later I was woken up by the sound of someone jiggling my door handle. Screw Joe, I thought. The door was locked so he couldn't get in. I ignored him for a while, hoping he would give up. But the door handle kept squeaking and moving. I very quietly crept out of my bed and put my hand on the lock. I was planning on carefully unsnicking it, then wrenching the door open and throwing myself at an unsuspecting Joe, screaming like a banshee. It would be so funny. I silently stifled a giggle, and I remained deathly silent. It wouldn't work if he heard me unlock and open the door. I had one hand on the little lock ready to twist it, and the other on the handle. I counted in my head, 3, 2, 1, and right then I had a little thought that I was tired and didn't want to prank Joe after all. I'd go back to bed and pretend to be asleep, and eventually he would stop fiddling with my door handle. So that's what I did. I got back in my warm bed and went off to sleep. I was woken by Joe some hours later. "Leica," he shouted, knocking on my door. "Come out of your room really carefully and don't freak out. Don't touch anything. I've already called the police." He sounded different to how he usually sounded. I carefully unlocked my door and slowly opened it. I looked outside of my room and noticed that every knife we had in the house was on the floor outside my room, arranged in a semicircle facing my door. We both liked to cook and had 2 sets of deadly sharp chef's knives and a set of steak knives. So yeah, we had a lot of knives. And right now, they were all on the landing carpet, pointing directly at my bedroom door. I asked Joe if he had heard anything, or if it was him trying to get in my room around 1 a.m. He looked at me wide-eyed and told me he hadn't even been home all night. His shift had finished at 11 p.m., and the night foreman hadn't shown up for his shift, so Joe had volunteered to stay and do a double. He'd finished around 6 a.m., arrived home to find a downstairs window had been forced open, and lots of things moved around. The police arrived and weren't even that bothered because no one was hurt and nothing had been taken, and nothing, apart from the lock on the window, was damaged. But tons of things around the house were moved around, and the way they were moved was like in weird shapes and patterns. I shudder when I think what could or would have happened if I would have wrenched that door open, thinking it was Joe. Drive to Non-Existent Place by Creaky Tits. This week has been hectic. My 3 kids have the flu. Oldest was first, then my younger 2 caught it. After a visit to the clinic, I was heading to the CVS down the street from our house for their prescriptions. I decided last minute to drop my kids off at home with their dad so they could rest and I could go inside the store to pick up some Pedialyte. I consider our neighborhood to be safe. I've taken walks after dark and never felt afraid. Most of our neighbors are older folks who have lived there over a decade. When I pulled up to the CVS, I parked on the side parallel to our street. It's darker on that side, but the entrance is right around the corner and well lit. There was a man standing outside, and he walked in front of my car. I could hear him talking, but my music was kind of loud. I figured he was on his phone or something. No real red flags yet. My husband called me as the man walked back towards the corner adjacent to the entrance. I got out of my car still on the phone, telling my husband, yeah, the kiddos have the flu, I'm picking up medicine at the CVS, etc. In a very pleasant voice, the man said to me, "Hey, I got a question for you. You know where Main Street is?" I, assuming he was asking for directions or the location of something, told him I did. I was still holding my phone to my ear. It's in a bright pink case, so I'm sure he could see it. By now, the man was standing directly in front of me. There was a pillar and a trash can behind him, and around the corner was a propane cage and a red box against the store's wall. Getting past him would put me in his arm's reach. Next, he asked me for a ride to where he asked me about. To a homeless shelter. It was very cold outside, and he didn't want to freeze. I empathized with him, but said that I couldn't. I offered to buy him gloves or a blanket, and to ask if an employee in the store could assist him in finding a ride. I mean, sweet baby Jesus, this guy's face instantly changed to pure rage. Then, right back to pleasant. Well, you know what happens to homeless people stuck outside. You're going to help me. It's right down the street. I was standing there unsure what to do. My husband was on the phone asking what was going on, and I gently told the man that I didn't feel comfortable doing that, and that I had the flu. I didn't really. And my husband was on the phone with me. Well, I don't care about the flu. Now he was getting more angry and not moving from my route into the store. I didn't want to turn back on him to go back to my car, which was several feet away in the dark. While the guy was glaring at me, I decided to quickly walk past him. I had my mask from the clinic in my jacket pocket, so I pulled that out and held it in front of me while I moved towards the trash can. He looked disgusted, but just kept telling me that I needed to give him a ride. It's right down the street, he kept insisting. But I know where that street is, and it's not as close as he says. He tried to guilt me, and his words felt threatening, but he didn't actually threaten me verbally. Once I was around the corner, I rushed into the store straight to the pharmacy. My husband said he was calling the police. He heard the way the man was talking to me and said to just stay in the store. My knees were shaking, and I'm not usually the type to be so afraid when confronted. When I got to the pharmacy, I interrupted the pharmacist and a customer, apologizing, and then told them what happened. The pharmacist sent the store manager out, this tall guy with a long beard, and looked like he didn't take any crap from anyone. The police had already arrived. The man was told to leave, which he did momentarily. But then he came back inside the store and started yelling obscenities and something about me. Now the manager told him to get the fuck out. He was trespassing on the property. The cop came back to talk to me and told me that she'd arrested him many times. He's loud and likes to yell at people, but he isn't violent. The pharmacist had me hiding behind the screen where they give vaccines and left the half door to the pharmacy cracked open in case I needed to get out of there. The cops had also told me this guy's first and last name, as did the store manager. Is that normal? My prescriptions were finally filled, and I left the store, and the police parked next to my car to keep an eye on me. Oh, and the man refused a ride from the cop to get to the shelter. Later I looked him up. His name is unique, so he was pretty easy to find online. Surprise, surprise, he has a long record spanning 3 states and several counties. Tons of public intoxication charges, DWI, urinating in public, assault and battery, and a decent exposure. I also looked up the homeless shelter. And yeah, as I thought, there isn't one where he wanted me to take him, but that area he did is super sketchy. Earlier today, I went to the corner store across from the CVS and told my friend, the overnight shift employee, what had happened. She said she kicks him out of the store all the time and calls the police every time because he yells and threatens customers. But he always takes off before the police arrive. I know I could have handled things better. I was blindsided by his instant shift from pleasant to rage-filled. And a big thank you to the pharmacy team who kept me safe and the store manager for confronting that creep. They didn't have to do all of that. And I'm thankful my husband recognized that I was in an unsafe situation over the phone and called the police. The thing that bothers me is, that man is still out there somewhere in my area. I'll Never Hitchhike Again, submitted by Donna P. I'll start by saying that I had less than a normal or good childhood, having grown up in foster care, so I don't really trust people. Strange that I did in this case. I'm not bashing all foster parents, but my experience was shitty to say the least. The courts took me away from my mom, and I've never really known my dad, who I did find out passed away when I was 3. My mother, now also dead, was a drug addict with a long history of criminal activity who had me as a result of a one-night fling with my dad. He was a soldier in the military at the time who picked my mom up at a bar one night when he was on R&R. Not long after I was born, my mother got into more legal trouble and was sentenced to prison for a 14-year stint. I mean, no poor me stuff here. I turned out okay despite the uphill battle. And a really bad set of parents who wanted to adopt me but legally couldn't for reasons I don't want to get into. By the time I was 18, I was sick of the abuse of my foster mom. She was a raging alcoholic who beat the shit out of me and her own 2 kids. And my foster dad was so terrified of her that he eventually broke down and took his kids away from her after I left. Why it took him so long to do that, I don't know. I like to think that I inspired him. That's a whole other story. I still talk to all 3 of them from time to time, and they're living better lives too. Anyway, I ran away from home and was either living on the streets of Chicago or crashing at friends' places and any other spot I could find. I worked a lot of fast food jobs, constantly saving money to move out to the West Coast. A childhood friend had moved out there with her family, and she kept inviting me, but I was determined to work my way there and not freeload off of her and her family. I often regret not just taking her on her offer immediately. This incident happened to me after I did save enough money to grab a Greyhound out to San Diego and have a little bit of bank as well. My friend invited me to live with her, and I'll call her June. She had a little place outside the city and helped me get a job in an office as a data entry person. I was starting to get some money stocked away, living and working there, and we had a lot of fun as 2 20-year-olds on their own, and her family was really cool too. They also knew I was on my own and basically treated me like they treated their daughter and involved me in all the family affairs. One night, I got off of work really late and texted June that I was stopping at a local place to get something to eat and that I'd meet her back home. She didn't respond, and I later found out she was with her boyfriend and had left her cell and a purse that she hadn't taken with her. Normally, she would have just come pick me up for the 4-mile ride back to the place we were staying. But when she didn't respond initially, I figured she was just busy and didn't want to bother her. I got some Mexican and ate before starting the walk home. Yeah, cheap-ass me wouldn't even get an Uber. I wanted to save every penny I was making. I was planning on attending college too, and was making sure to do it right and not get into massive debt with loans. So I began my walk, just listening to my headphones, and it started to drizzle. It was wintertime, and though it doesn't get super cold out here too often, I really wasn't dressed for the long walk. At a corner waiting for a light, a pickup truck stopped at the light and a guy called out the window, "Hey, do you need a lift?" I know better and should have known better then, but I didn't want to be out in the wet stuff anymore, and I looked at the guy. He was in his early 30s, clean-cut and clean-shaven, and I decided to take a chance. We weren't in the hood or conversely the middle of nowhere, so what could possibly be the harm? I said sure and got in, and he rolled up the window. He told me his name was Jim and that he remembered many times walking in the rain and how much it sucked. He seemed nice enough and asked me where he could take me. I was wise enough to just give him an intersection a couple of blocks from our place. Amazing I was smart enough to not give him my own address. We drove along for a little bit talking about the weather, and when we were at a spot of road with no buildings or anything around, he slammed on the brakes. For a split second, I thought we were going to get into an accident, but then I remembered I didn't have my seatbelt on, and my head slammed into the front windshield, and the last thing I remember was a loud crack. And that was it. I didn't know at the time, but I came to about a half an hour later, and I knew something was wrong. I was laying kind of in a fetal position, and it smelled like a wet dog where I was, in the dark. I knew I was still in a vehicle as I could feel the motion of movement and the sounds of traffic were right outside. I tried to sit up, but my head hurt like all hell, and my head bumped into something metal. My eyes adjusted, and my heart jumped into my throat. I was in the back of the pickup truck I had just been up front in, and I was in a large dog crate. I immediately panicked and screamed. I spun around on my haunches and noticed that my knees hurt. They were digging into the metal grating of the dog cage. And I also noticed my tights were around my ankles. My panties were still on, and for a horrified second I thought I'd been raped, but I realized that that wasn't the case. Gee, that's great. Only locked in an animal cage in the back of a truck. I saw a padlock on the cage, and a brief second light came in through the truck bed window. I screamed again and again and realized I was in very, very deep trouble. The truck kept going despite my screaming for help and what was happening. But after about 10 minutes, the truck started to slow down and was making a lot of turns, tossing me back and forth. I'd had enough mind to pull my pants back up and then saw my backpack just outside the cage. I checked my pockets for my phone, finally coming to my senses, but it wasn't on me. The truck finally stopped and everything was quiet. I heard someone get out of the front of the truck and walk around to the back. The hatch opened and I screamed again for help, but only saw the silhouette of this Jim guy standing there. He didn't say anything for a minute and then reached over to the lock on the cage. I screamed again and he just said, "Shut the fuck up and you'll get out of this alive." I cowered in the back of the cage, scared shitless and thinking, this is it. I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead. The guy unclicked the cage, opened the door, and grabbed one of my ankles and pulled me towards him. I panicked and grabbed for anything to hold on to, but he tugged super hard, and I slid out with my butt on the hatch. He grabbed both of my arms and said, "Shut the fuck up," and he stood me up and pushed me to the side. I stood there shaking and praying for my life, and he stood there looking at me. He looked right into my eyes and said, "Your lucky day. You're not blonde." I should point out that I have dyed dark red hair, but you can see some of my roots. I put my hand to my hair and he just smiled and said, "Don't worry, I checked," and he pointed at my crotch. This sick fuck had pulled my pants down to see what color hair I really had. Without another word, he handed me back my backpack and shut the hatch on his truck. "Count to 100 before you go for your phone," was all he said. Then he got back into his truck and drove away fast. I was standing in the drizzling rain in the dark on a small road, shaking and terrified. After a few minutes, I went through my backpack and got my phone. There were a bunch of texts from June, and I blew them all off as I called her, bawling my eyes out and screaming. She got me to calm down and asked me where I was, but I didn't know and didn't even think to look on my Google Maps to see if my phone would tell me. It did. I was in the middle of a park about 10 miles outside of town. June told me to find a place to hide and that she and her boyfriend were coming to get me. The little park road showed up on my phone map, and I started running towards what I figured was the entrance to the park. June stayed on the phone with me the entire time until I got to the entrance, and a little while later she pulled up with her boyfriend. I jumped into their car and could not stop crying and screaming, but June finally got me to calm down a little and we called the police. They came out after about a half hour and I gave them a full report of everything that happened. What this guy Jim looked like, what his truck looked like, where he picked me up, what time it was, all of that. I mentioned that he said the only reason I was alive was because I wasn't blonde, my only saving grace. They suggested I go to the hospital to get checked out, and I did with them. And other than a massive bump on my head and my state of shock, I was physically okay. After a few hours, they let me go and June and her boyfriend took me home. All I wanted was a stiff drink and to curl into a ball and cry. At the end of the day, nothing happened. But how the hell were the police going to find a guy in a city this large? I only blame myself for my stupidity in making a very, very bad decision. For months, I refused to go to work or come home by myself, and it's only been recently that I've gotten my own vehicle. Even still, I am freaked out to be alone a lot, and I avoid that intersection Jim picked me up like the plague. Be careful out there, everyone. I will never hitchhike again, and I don't recommend anyone else do it either.